Hi, welcome back to Neural Splendor. This is actually part two of the longer version of the why should I increase my idle speed when I do long-term idling in cold weather. So when I worked at Cummins, I spent a lot of time in the parking lot with it was mainly owner operators, sometimes fleet drivers, and I'd just be talking to them like I'm talking to you, and I would explain things to them. So that's kind of the format I use or I think in my head when I'm doing videos like this where I'm just talking to you and not showing you items on the screen. So I'm going to talk to you now about what goes on with the cold idle and the after treatment. So in your heavy duty engines, they have a protection feature in the after treatment called after treatment warm up. In some calibrations that is automatically on, you can't turn it off. In other calibrations you can turn it off. And what that's for is if a customer lets the truck just base idle, and let's say summertime for a long period, the after treatment will get cold, you'll get water condensation in it, and they don't want that to happen. They want it to stay dry, so if you jump in that truck and take off down the road, you don't crack the element. You don't want a lot of steam in there because those are ceramic elements and you'll have hot and cold spots and it can crack. That's one of the reasons. In the newer elements, I think they might be silicon carbide. They aren't saying, but they're much more durable. I believe the Fords were silicon carbide quite a while ago, like the Power Stroke, the stuff in there. And that makes them durable. That can handle a lot more temperature, a lot more abuse. It's a little more expensive, but that's what the newer stuff to my eye appears to be, the silicon carbide DPF filters. So anyway, you need to keep those things warm. When we're talking about warm, I'm going to say they probably don't want that after treatment down much below 350 degrees, 375 degrees when you're idling. So they can get down into, if it's really cold out, down in the teens. Those things used to be able to get down to 150, 175 degrees, and that's way too cold if you're going to jump in and take off. So they came out with this feature called after treatment warm up. On the new common rail engines, when you are in certain RPM bands, the software only allows certain things to happen. If you go up over 1,000 RPM on the ISX common rails, that engine can't jump into software warm-up. It can't do it because it's in a different operating state and the turbo has to go to a certain position, timing has to change to achieve that after treatment warm-up at a base idle speed. Well, you can run a PTO pump all day at 1,000 RPM or 1,100. You would prevent the engine from going into after treatment warm-up if you ran there because there should be sufficient heat because you're putting load on the engine now. Now when I talk about running in PTO, I'm talking about the pump running. So that's the reason you stay at 950, because at 950 when you're long-term idling, that 1,000 RPM magic number, as long as you're under that, the engine can still go into after treatment warm-up mode. And since you've enabled Regen in PTO mode, it can get up to 800 or 900 degrees or 1,000 degrees, whatever it needs to, because you gave it permission when you enabled that parameter. Now, why don't they have that enabled right out of the box? The main reason is safety. So if you've got stacks on the side of your truck and you're sitting there and let's say you're pumping a trailer off where you got to run that pump for 45 minutes for an hour, that PTO, if it decides to go into Regen, you could have 1,150 degree pipes right up on the side of your cab, and if someone walked by and brushed up against it, they're going to be stuck to the pipe, basically. They're going to have a pretty severe burn on their arm. Also, if you're in an area where there's fumes, let's say you're in a giant refinery, you can't have that exhaust getting that hot because you've exceeded the flash point possibly of something that's in the air. So you have to keep that disabled so it can't get hot in PTO mode. We have a lot of machines, cranes that go into these refineries, and they are very specific about when you can and cannot regen that machine. So we have to have the regen lockout switch turned off so it can't regen in some cases. So those are the two primary reasons that I think Cummins, and this is my personal opinion, that Cummins disables that feature of after treatment regen and PTO by default. And by default I mean most of the time in the calibrations you'll see that it is disabled. There's another setting in there that says after treatment regeneration, and it's 5 miles an hour or 0 miles an hour. This is a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about, but I'm going to address it since we're here. By default, that number is set to 5 miles an hour. So let's say you idled all night and then you get up and you've got to do city drops today, and you're not going to ever get over 35 miles an hour. Well, if that number is set at 5 miles an hour, what that really means is you have to get the road speed up over 45 miles an hour for a period of time, and I've been told that's around 15 or 20 minutes, and this is all about getting the exhaust system up the temperature to the place where it can initiate what's called a passive regen. And that's where the engine changes timing and fueling, and the turbo VGT will change. You still have your horsepower, but the exhaust temperature is much, much hotter. And now you are actually in a regen and cleaning the exhaust. Below 45 miles an hour and below a certain load, the engine doesn't have the ability to achieve that. So if you idled all night in PTO mode and you took off the next day and did city stops, you could conceivably be in the third stage of plugging and have that light come on your dash that says, hey, you need to pull over and do a stationary regen for an hour. And if you don't, it's going to go into the fourth stage, and then you're stuck at the fourth stage, which would be when the check engine light comes on and the regen light's on and the check engine light starts flashing, and then it'll go to the red stoplight and you're done. You're at 5 miles an hour. You have to be towed or have a road call or whatever. So we don't want to go there, right? So that's the reason you enable the regen and PTO, so that you don't have that problem in the morning. And we have seen vehicles idle at remote job sites for days. It shouldn't happen, but it does. It's sitting there day and night, nobody's there, and it's running. Why do they do that? Because the temperature is below zero, and they know if they don't keep that thing warm, especially if it's a machine that's got hydraulic fluid, if they don't keep it warm, it's never going to start. And if they do start it by disengaging the pump PTO on the cranes, and then they pull that lever in, a lot of times it'll shear the shaft right off, and now you got to pull the pump out. That would be like the input shaft of the transmission gets sheared right off because those pumps are so cold they can't turn. And the engine's going to turn. It's going to give you plenty of torque. So that's another reason that they do excessive idling at remote job sites. Not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying it's what it is. Okay, let's go and talk about PTO in the cab. When you get in the cab and you look at your dash, the older trucks had that air switch down by the seat. Sometimes it's on the dash, got the yellow button with the red in the middle. You got to push that red button down and pull up on the yellow, and you flip that switch and you can hear the air signal line engage, little shot of air, and then you hear the noise of the PTO, the humming noise, or hopefully not the grinding noise, but sometimes the grinding noise. You might hear the pump run, whatever it's driving. That's PTO being driven, okay? That is not the same as PTO mode to the engine. PTO mode to the engine is this. When you are not moving, the switches you use for cruise control become your PTO ramp up switches. They raise RPM. So Cummins calls raising the RPM when you're sitting still above the idle speed PTO mode. There's two types of PTO when we're talking about the engine. There's standard PTO and there's remote PTO. They call it remote PTO because it's a special extra switch you wire in on your dash. I won't go into the settings here, I'll just tell you this. The remote PTO is a switch that you just flip on or off. So when you flip it on, the engine goes to whatever the speed is you set the remote PTO to run at when you turn that switch on. So you could have that extra switch installed and wired in to the ECM and turn on the function and insight, and you can set it to 950 for heavy duty, or you could set it to 1050 for the mid-range engine. And when you flip that switch on, if the wheels aren't turning, it'll go right to that RPM and it will stay there till you run out of fuel or you turn the switch off. One of the two. So that's remote PTO. Again, standard PTO is when you turn the cruise switch on and you hit set or resume. And those switches by default are usually set at 850. Sometimes it'll be 850 and 950. And then if you hold the switch down, it'll ramp up, or that means speed up or slow down, depending which way you push the switch. And there's a maximum set for that. And out of the box, it's usually 1400 RPM because there's not many PTOs, the physical, mechanical ones you want to run over the speed they get to when you're at 1400 engine RPM. And the reason I say the speed they get to is because there are different gear ratios that you can have down in your mechanical gear-driven PTO out the side of the transmission. So I hope I cleared that up a little bit and you understand that we're not talking about mechanical PTOs, but we're talking about software RPM. And I guess the last thing I'll say is if you can avoid excessive idling, it's better to shut the engine off. Our road tractors, we put tri-packs on. Those are those Thermo King little pony engines that bolt on the side. And as long as that system's functioning, the drivers will shut the drive engine off and they'll just run that pony engine, and that gives them their heat and AC. And it also charges the truck batteries if they require it. Okay, thanks for joining me at NeuroSplendor. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Take care and see you next time. And if you haven't already, subscribe and tell your friends about this if it'll help them. Take care and good night.